Mexico's president sounded off on his meeting with Donald Trump.
Enrique Peña Nieto is taking heat from critics about Wednesday's sit-down with the GOP presidential nominee. However, Peña Nieto said he wanted to get to know the billionaire. He said they talked about respecting his country's people, values, and culture. Peña Nieto also repeated his claim that Mexico will not pay for a proposed border wall.
So who will moderate the presidential debate, and did Trump's south of the border visit, turn him presidential?
Political analysts Wendy, Patrick, and Laura Fink join us with more. Ladies, good morning.
Good morning.
Let's get right to it. The debate, the moderators, they're released this morning. So we've got this list out. First debate, it's going to be moderated by Lester Holt from NBC. The second one, Martha Raddatz of ABC, Anderson Cooper of CNN. Does it matter that all of these different networks are kind of all being moshed together? Will it make a difference? Wendy, I'll have you start.
It won't make a difference as far as what networks they come from. What will make a difference is the dynamic that these moderators are going to create. And this was a delicate decision because remember the viewers pick up on the either animosity or congeniality between the candidates and whoever's moderating the discussion. We saw that in grand fashion when we had 17 candidates on the stage, for example, on the GOP side. It's going to be narrowed down to just two, but two of the most distinct personalities than you can imagine. This has been one of the most highly anticipated events in television history, no doubt. So yes, it's incredibly important who ends up moderating it, but they did make some great selections that neither candidate really balked at. And although, of course, candidates do not have a say, they do not have a veto power, if you will, over who's selected, you bet it's going to make a difference, and that obviously went into the selection.
Laura, your turn.
Well, I mean, I don't have much more to say on that. I think moderators only matter when candidates make them an issue, and you only make them an issue when you are having a hard time and struggling in a debate. So I think that the people that point to the media or engage the moderators or call unfair, generally it's because they're behind. And in terms of the debate, Donald Trump is really the one that needs to score a win. Any candidate that's behind in the polls needs to use the debates to regain the advantage. So Donald Trump, expect him to do as he has done in the past, making one-to-one combat not only with Hillary Clinton but also with the moderators.
Okay, let's talk about this trip to Mexico. This wasn't a vacation to Cancun or Cabo or anything like that. The attempt at looking presidential with another world leader, did this work in terms of the strategy for Donald Trump? Laura, what's your take on that?
Well, I think it worked for about 30 seconds. I think the problem was that we've had a year and a half of the opposite effect. So Donald Trump, in contradicting immediately after he stood, he looked fairly presidential behind the podium, but as soon as he started talking, he ended up contradicting what Enrique Peña Nieto was going to say. That's a violation of Diplomacy 101. So I think the challenge was not only that, but then he came back and gave an hour-and-a-half speech full of invective, doubling down on his strategy to appeal really almost exclusively to white men. That is his campaign strategy. We saw it in stark relief with an hour and a half of really divisive, intense rhetoric that goes against every poll number I'm sure Kellyanne Conway's looking at that shows that he would need to come up with a more humane approach to this issue.
Wendy, your thoughts? Because I found it interesting that when you're looking at the way Donald Trump was speaking in Mexico next to the president, and then when he started that speech in Arizona, boy, it's like two completely different people.
It was, and I'll take the other side of that argument just for fun. If I were a Trump supporter, one of the things that Trump supporters are saying is that this really gave him an opportunity to showcase the way he is able to be and to look presidential as he did in Mexico.
Yeah.
By the way, Raul and Heather, that is not the way he's going to look on the debate stage with Hillary Clinton. So let's just get all notions of that out of our mind. So he comes back and he gives a fiery speech in Arizona. That is what a lot of his supporters wanted to see and wanted to hear. Now, is it a big deal that they have a contradiction over whether Mexico is going to pay for the wall?
Right.
No. I mean, the art of the deal, Donald Trump first sentence in that book, I don't do it for the money. He doesn't. But in building a relationship, you don't just go for the throat and go right into who's going to pay for the wall. And by the way, he's likely to find a creative way that Mexico pays for the wall. In other words, they're not going to be just forking over a check. So this is all things that are going to be smoothed out in the future. Trump would be the first person to admit that. But many of his supporters even like the speech in Arizona.
Well, Wendy's right that the supporters like the speech, but he needs to expand his base. And you don't do that by directly contradicting what happened at a meeting immediately following. I mean, these are usually non-events press conferences following diplomatic meetings. Everybody agrees on everything, even when tough problems are there to be solved. So I think Trump's problem is, again, expanding this base. And there are three signs I wanted to point out that show that that are trouble for him that he's going to have to overcome. The first is money. Right now, he hasn't announced his numbers. Hillary Hillary had a very strong month. The second, and perhaps more important, when you are counting on this tsunami of voters that don't usually vote to support you, you need to have the infrastructure and the ground game in place. They are behind the curve with voting starting in 3 weeks. They are going to have to sprint to make that up.
Hard to believe that.
By the
voting
way,
starts
Trump
in
does
3
contradict
weeks.
himself. By the way, Trump does contradict himself. This is not the first time, and I almost feel like people expect a little bit of inconsistency from him to begin with.
Well,
ladies-
the people, but not the world diplomatic leaders.
They
You
might
can't
too.
re-
Everybody's watching these debates. Everybody's watching TV.
Ladies, before we go, you know, we talk about the contradiction. We talk about whether or not Trump's going to read off a teleprompter, things like that. He has this new deputy campaign manager, David Bossie. Do you think that's going to help at all?
Well, if we can stop talking about his personal life, I mean, you know, we've seen this with a lot of people that are appointed to actually both of the campaigns. This really isn't a partisan issue. You look at the people who are surrounding a candidate and deciding whether or not that's part of the kind of a team you want to elect. So as much as we would like to say we're simply going to focus on the merits, and I hope we really do start focusing on the merits, it's true some of these side issues continue to gain traction in the news cycle.
Laura?
we'll let you have the last
I
word
mean,
here.
I mean, again, I don't think that any sort of a staffing change is really going to change his direction. If the heavy hitters couldn't convince Trump to take a look at what might be a sane path to getting elected, a deputy campaign manager isn't going to do it.
All right, Laura, Wendy, we thank you again. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will chat more for sure next week.
All right,
Thanks,
thanks,
you
Heather.
too.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Raul.
ladies.